Half-Life 1 is a horror game. Obviously, it wasn't intended to be one, but for the 12-year-old version of me, back in the year 2012, it felt like one to say the least. The spider-like headcrabs, the zombies with their open torsos and bloody claws, the deafening screams of the hound-eye packs, the mysterious but smart Vortigons, the bull squids that could smell and hear you, and the iconic tentacle triplet of the blast pit. These memorable characters that appeared all throughout the campaign of Half-Life 1 sometimes scared me so much that I would stop playing for a few days. Combine that with the little to zero hand-holding that the gameplay and narratives of Half-Life games offered, along with the occasional jump scare, you get the perfect recipe for a video game that took a terrified boy who barely knew English and first-person shooters at the time 2 years to complete. Before we continue, I apologize for any weird breaks and hitches in my speech. I have a very mild stutter, and I sometimes struggle to pronounce things because of my weirdly shaped tongue and teeth. And English being a second language doesn't make it better. Thank you, let's move on. This video is about the video game Half-Life 1, but it is also about my experience growing up with it. When I was 12, I did not know much about computers or gaming consoles, let alone the games and gaming communities that surrounded them. I was born and raised in arguably one of the least developed countries in the Southeast Asian region. Those who were lucky enough to have dial-up internet over the telephone cables barely had 32 kilobytes per second of download speed, and that's on a sunny day. Any amount of rain or humidity would completely kill the signal. Speaking of computers, in the grand year of 2012, my engineer father brought home a retired PC for us to tinker with. It was one of those old Intel Core 2 Duo PCs on the Intel LGA 775 sockets with a built-in graphics unit on the motherboard. The setup had the classic CRT monitor, and the PC's media bay still had a floppy disk reader in it, but it was just that, a bare-bones PC with Windows XP on it. The first few video games that I would ever lay my hands on were Minesweeper and Pinball, but I wasn't entertained by them. Sure, some took pride knowing how to beat Minesweeper, and some enjoyed the adrenaline rush of the fast-paced nature of Pinball, but I felt different. I felt that I had to somehow play this legendary game that I've been hearing about called Counter-Strike. If you know anything about the internet cafe culture of Asia, then you know what it's all about. Even in 2024, you might find that a good chunk of casual gamers in Asia don't own PCs or consoles of their own, and way back in the 2000s and 2010s, it would have been more than a good chunk. Although such gamers regularly convened at internet cafes, they weren't there to play games via the internet. No, they were there for LAN showdowns. Just take a look at this legendary clip from the Philippines. LAN games like Counter-Strike 1.6, Warcraft, and Call of Duty were all the rage of middle, high schoolers, and even adults at the time. Hanging out at a local internet cafe with the boys one Saturday, the first thing I got to learn was how to play Counter-Strike. While my buddies were having the time of their lives, I sat there soaking it all in. The gunplay, the movement, the sound design, everything about it was just mind-blowing to me at the time. Before I continue to the conclusion of Chapter 1, I must state a disclaimer. I realize that media piracy is a heated topic of debate these days. Considering what I'm about to say, I am not encouraging nor discouraging the act of piracy, but having explained the context, you should be able to understand their circumstances. With that said, I was completely hooked onto Counter-Strike. This is the game. This is the game that I want to play every day, I thought. But how could I get it onto my PC at home, so I didn't have to go to an internet cafe every day? Turns out that the guy running the cafe was also selling a bunch of pirated CDs and DVDs behind the counter. And surprise surprise, he had a CD ready to go with Counter-Strike on it. A few months would pass, and despite missing the screeching and raging of other people in internet cafes, I very much enjoyed the single-player experience. But one fateful evening, the course of my life would change forever. As I double-clicked on a random program inside the pirated game that I got from an internet cafe, a program with the icon of the lambda symbol, a program named hl.exe. I absolutely love the idea of a literal in-universe training course for the main character. That is what the Black Mesa Hazard course is. It teaches you both the basic controls of a first-person shooter game and the various puzzle mechanics and obstacles one might encounter during the Half-Life campaign. Then, at the end of the course, they teach you the proper American etiquette. I wonder what they're foreshadowing here. The prelude to the campaign of Half-Life is just as memorable. Anyone who's played through the game once always remembers the iconic tram ride at the start of the game. If you don't, well, I don't know what to say. Despite the game advertising itself as a sci-fi action-adventure game, its first few minutes of quote-unquote gameplay signal to you something else entirely. The eerie music that plays in the background as you ride the tram and the bureaucratic instruction coming from the PA announcer are just a few examples of that. Two more things that I'll mention are the insane number of doors that the tram goes through and the quick flyover of the military attack helicopter. While all of this noise and visuals bombard you, the feeling of suspense and mystery seems to be just as loud and obvious. Consider the panic of both Gordon Freeman and you, the player, as soon as the resinous cascade begins. Clearly, this event was supposed to happen as intended by the developers of Half-Life, but it doesn't feel like it because both you and Gordon have been led into a false sense of security. Somehow, they managed to pull off, for both you and the main character of the game, Gordon Freeman obtaining the Mark IV HEV suit and hearing all of that technobabble about the suit's capabilities serves as an injection of false confidence into you and Gordon. Gordon, as a regular scientist at the Black Mesa Research Facility, would expect safety and security of the HEV suit that he likely wears all the time at work, and you as the player would now expect the same after seeing and hearing all of that. The cherry on top, however, are the security guards around Black Mesa that sometimes address you as Sir, and the canonical Barney Calhoun who wishes to have a brotherly time with you over some beers. Half-Life storytelling and world building is just so good, man. I love it. We'll soon get to why I decided to make this video in the first place. Before we do that, I just wanted to tell you to go and play the game in its entirety for yourself if you haven't. Although I may have already spoiled some things by this point, that's because I assumed you already know and play the game. So the rest of this video won't be about the intricate story details about the Half-Life canon. Otherwise, it would be a 10-hour long video, and videos explaining the lore of the Half-Life universe already exist on YouTube, and I would recommend those if you desire to watch them. In the following chapter, I will go over the various characters that I mentioned in the introduction and why they scared the hell out of me. The reason the title of this chapter says what it says is that the level design of Half-Life 1 in most of the game is deliberately narrow and claustrophobic. As you find your way through the ruins of Black Mesa Research Facility, you are often forced to crawl into ventilation shafts that are pitch black inside, and sometimes branching into dead ends or secret stashes of loot. Even with the limited technology of the late 1990s, the audio designers of the game worked in tandem with the level designers to create this sense of being in the back rooms, together with the metallic and reverb sound effects that accompany them. You are always made to feel uneasy and especially oppressed. You have zero idea of what they might just throw at you the next time you turn the corner inside a dark vent, and may God help you if you'd run out of battery for your flashlight at such a crucial moment. And this is where those pesky little head crabs come into play. These annoying little guys are all over Black Mesa, in the hallways, in the vents, on your head, or in your pants, you name it. Head crabs do make bird-like noises, but they are completely silent more often than not. So on some occasions, while you are distracted by something, these guys will jump scare the hell out of you as they try to latch onto your head. The most offending use case of these creatures is in the vent. You need to have your flashlight powered and pointed straight ahead inside those vents at all times, because these head crabs roam around in them and they will tear your face off if you are not prepared. Yes, by the time you're a third of the way into the game, you might get used to this and be no longer afraid of simple head crabs, but when you're at your last bit of health, one laceration from these bad boys is all it takes for you to beat Gaben. Thank him for the autosave and quick save systems. Headcrabs were annoying, yes, but they have one more trick up their sleeves. Neurosurgeons hate them for this. Throughout the Black Mesa research facility, you will often come across zombies. In fact, you meet one right away at the start of the game. These zombies are actually host bodies for the headcrabs that have latched onto the host's head. According to the lore of the game, once a headcrab latches onto a host's head, it bites its way through the skull and into the brain, where it can assume control of the host's body as its own. You think that would be the end of the story, until you find out that the host bodies may actually be alive and conscious. This is a theory stemming from the observed behavior of zombies from the sequel, Half-Life 2, where one could hear the host human beg for help or for mercy when they are set on fire. The nightmares don't end here. If you observe the zombies closely, they seem to have a large gaping wound from the neck all the way down to the belly, with teeth-like protrusions on the edges. However, those are not teeth at all. They are the protruding ribs of the host human. People say breaking a rib is one of the most painful things ever. I couldn't go through having my ribcage split open while I'm fully conscious of the pain. It only reinforces the theory. If oversized fleas and tragic zombies weren't enough, the next thing up the list are the hound eyes. These creatures are the size of a large dog breed and they are very agile. They are observed resting and hunting in packs, just like real canines. The way they attack their prey though is quite unique. They sprint towards you as close as possible, then they charge up a loud sonic scream and release it. Their screams are powerful enough to break wood, shatter glass, and even dislodge metal. Even Gordon Freeman in the HEV suit is not immune to the simple but powerful attacks of the hound eyes. The reason they were so scary to me as a kid was that they can be hard to put down without a ranged weapon. Because their attacks work in close proximity, having no ammo for your guns meant that you had to resort to beating them to a pulp with your sturdy crowbar. And of course, when you are low on health, this becomes a big problem. Rotigons, on the other hand, behave in the exact opposite manner. They can charge up a laser-like beam and attack you from long range. One major flaw, however, of these enemies is that they are quite chatty. In the dark spaces of the office complex of Black Mesa, if you stopped and listened quietly, you could hear the Rotigons mumbling in their alien language. Even with the lack of the element of surprise, simply hearing them around the corner means that you will have to deal with them one way or another. So, you try to do just that, then you realize that they are smarter than they look. The Vortigons can flee, reposition, and charge at you if they wanted. Their programming was simply way ahead of the times. Of course, without spoiling anything, we eventually learn why they are the way they are in the sequel. Last but not least, they are the bull squids. You rarely meet them in the game, but when you do, you better take them out quickly. They will relentlessly spit acid at you, no matter how far you are. I believe they were programmed with the ability to smell and hear, but that unfortunately doesn't seem to matter that much each time you encounter one or more of them. So what's even scary about them? Well, firstly, they can do a high amount of damage in melee range, and secondly, they have a good amount of endurance. You'll find yourself giving the bull squids a healthy amount of lead before they go down. Now, I will admit that I kind of rushed through this chapter. That is because these characters appear all throughout this campaign. They are not meant to be boss fights, just more enemies for you to deal with. Of course, 12-year-old me did not think this way 12 years ago, but there is one level in particular that haunts me to this day. In the section of the Half-Life 1 campaign called Blast Pit, we encounter a triplet of monsters that have taken refuge within a missile testing silo. They are tentacle-like creatures with gigantic beaks on their heads that they use to strike their targets. When you first enter the area, the immediate reaction that the game designers want you to have is, what the F, because of all the noise being made. The three tentacle monsters seem to be constantly striking at the metal platforms around the testing silo, creating insanely loud bangs each time. Even before you physically see the tentacles, it sets the precedent that there is something big, something huge, waiting for you to discover. If you move fast enough, you might even witness a Black Mesa security guard getting squashed into bits and pieces by one of the tentacles. A scientist who is on the verge of death simply tells you to, quote, fire the engines to stop the thing before it gets any larger. In this instance, at least, you are told directly what to do. But imagine, for a 12-year-old kid such as me back in 2012 who barely knows English, trying to understand what the scientist just said over the deafening banging noises being made by the tentacles. Having experienced the exploding security guard, the scientist getting dragged away by one of the tentacles, and literally not knowing what to do, I was honestly stuck at this point in the game for nearly a year. It took that long because I only had 30 minutes of screen time every day when I was 12. Without proper know-how of the internet in English, I couldn't just look up a walkthrough or find cheats that I could use to overcome this obstacle. All I knew was that I was probably supposed to make my way into the silo and somehow get past the tentacles. But every time I stepped out into the silo, I would get smushed. It happens so fast that sometimes I get jump scared, even though it was obvious what was going to happen. That constant banging noise was drilled into my head from that day, and I can forever recall it in my mind. After an ungodly amount of trial and error, I made it to the first part of the solution to the problem, and from that point, it became clear what I was supposed to do: fire that rocket engine. So I did. And when I did, it was one of the greatest achievements of my life. I grew as a gamer and as a person. I started to learn how game designers want gamers to solve their puzzles, and I learned how to face my fears, or else face failure. You might be thinking, if these tentacle monsters were trouble for this guy, I'm pretty sure the Gargantua would have been as problematic. And yes, you would be correct. Instead of me saying the same thing for the next 60 seconds, just replace the tentacles with the Gargantua in your head, and you've got the general idea. Half-Life 1 to me was a horror game, but it was also one of the best, if not the best, sci-fi action-adventure first-person shooter games that I've ever played. Around the time I got to playing this game and finishing it, I was struggling with math, especially calculus, in high school. If you are surprised to find out that young teenagers were learning calculus 6 years before college, I don't blame you. It's simply an Asian thing. It was also around this time that regular people in my country started to have easy access to the internet. You could easily guess what I looked up on the internet as a typical teenager, but one of the things that I shall mention as material for this video is physics. After witnessing everything that Half-Life 1 had to offer, I became very interested in the world of physics and philosophy. I spent countless hours watching YouTubers such as Vsauce, Veritasium, and PBS Spacetime, and so on. Despite having zero idea of what they were talking about most of the time, their videos, along with my obsession of video games and computers, inspired me to take on the challenge of learning physics, and so I did. I earned my bachelor's degree in physics with a minor in philosophy back in 2022, and throughout my 4 years of college, I put myself out there, working multiple jobs and earning the recognition of my peers and professors, and that put me in a PhD program in physics in the fall of 2022. I feel awful to tell you, after having said all that I quit the pursuit of a PhD last December. I had enough credits to be eligible for a master's degree, but I couldn't pass the infamous PhD qualifying exams. which was a requirement to earn the master's degree in the first place. My journey towards a doctoral degree may be suspended, but I'm still a big nerd at heart. I couldn't handle the insane burnout of graduate school any longer, but I still know and understand a vast majority of physics. Half-Life 1 is partially responsible for who I am and what I know today. Getting that degree in physics taught me so many more skills that I could have ever imagined, and now it is my responsibility to make use of them. And with that said, thank you so very much for watching this small recap of my life and my experience with Half-Life 1. Remember when I mentioned the different LAN games that internet cafe goers played? Well, let me just say that the next nostalgic thing that I might just talk about could be Warcraft and Dota. If you enjoy this content, such as feeling nostalgic about video games and other things in general, consider liking and subscribing. This motivates me to create more content like this in the future. Thank you.